2025 began with the shock of a terrorist attack in New Orleans. So I talked with Andrew Donaldson about this and more that is happening in 2025 coming up. Hello, and welcome to Church in Maine, a podcast for people interested in seeing where faith, politics, and culture intersect. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. So I am recording this opening portion of the podcast on Wednesday evening, January 8th. When most of you hear this tomorrow, which will be January 9th, many people will be pausing during the day to pay their final respects for President Jimmy Carter, who died at the age of 100 on December 29th. January 9th is the date of the state funeral that will take place in Washington, D.C. At the same time, we're actually getting ready. We're about, at this point, 12 days out from the inauguration of Donald Trump as our 47th president. And that happens just 4 years after he stepped down from being the 45th president. So for this episode of Church in Maine, we're going to talk about the legacy of Jimmy Carter, evangelicals, and the incoming presidency of Donald Trump. And I can't think of anyone better to talk about this than with Andrew Donaldson. Andrew has been a frequent guest here to Church in Maine. He is a go-to when I want to talk about the nitty-gritty of politics and religion. Andrew is a native of West Virginia, the host of the Heard Tell podcast, and managing editor of the Ordinary Times blog, and also a widely published opinion writer who appears in media, radio, and as a talking head on television. In addition to talking about the presidents, we also talk about how social media and legacy media handled the recent terrorist attack that took place in New Orleans on New Year's Day. Now, Andrew is always an engaging person to talk with, and he has a good eye on what's going on in the world. So I think that you're going to enjoy this talk. So join me in this fascinating and conversation with Andrew Donaldson. Hey, Andrew, it's good to have you back. Happy New Year.
Sir, love talking to you. You're one of my favorite people. I love the work you do on the podcast, Church in Maine and others. So it's a thrill to be here. I really appreciate it.
Cool. I want to kind of start to talk, to get your opinion, because you had a really good podcast, I think it was yesterday, about what happened in New Orleans on New Year's Day. And kind of how social media and the media dropped the ball on it. And I actually remember kind of going on Twitter just to see what was going on. And it was kind of confusing because it was, well, one, there were some people who were showing videos that probably showed me more than I really want to know and didn't really need to see that. There was some gruesome video. But then there was also everyone just, Tom, Dick, and Harry that was just showing breaking, here's this out. And it's like, after a while, we're just like, okay, this is not helping. So I wanted to get kind of your opinion, because Twitter is kind of where you really kind of got your start, and where you kind of have used that in the past to help you in your career as a journalist, and to see kind of what you thought about how Twitter and social media in general, and then also the media, handled this event.
Poorly, to answer the questions and work backwards a little bit. This is horrific. People, if you've never been to New Orleans, people that haven't been there, Bourbon Street is actually really narrow. It's really small. They think about the parades and stuff. That's all on Canal Street, which runs, perpendicular. So Canal Street's a little more, it's wider. The parades and stuff are on Canal Street. Bourbon Street's kind of an overglorified alley in some places, especially
It
on the end
is.
where they were. It's very, very narrow, and then you get down on to the French Quarter where it widens out a little bit, and you get the balconies and the traditional what people think of. Where this was, it's basically an alley, and it was an alley that was absolutely full of people, and it's just horrific. So the imagery is something that we need to start with when we go to Twitter, because this is just the world we live in. We've lived in it for about 15 years or so since the smartphones came out. Really, you're going to get the images before you get the story,
Hmm.
and then the images are going to dictate the story. So you had people dug, and how it was only it's a horrific number as it is, but how it wasn't more when you look at the videos of people trying to get out of the way. It's really amazing. If this had been at midnight instead of 2:30,
Oh, yeah.
like you're talking about thousands more people in the way. I don't even know how much more that would have gone. The world we live in is you're going to get the images first, and then you'll get the story later. And it used to be Twitter was really good for breaking news because you could find out immediately, okay, this reporter's physically standing there. Here's the local station. Like if you have, God forbid, a shooting or something and it's in some small town you never heard of, you don't know what the local TV station is. You don't know what the local newspaper is. Now, New Orleans is a little different. We know, Times Picayune. We know the stations. There's been a lot of big news there over the years. People are kind of familiar with it. But you just know, like, okay, this reporter's there, and Twitter will say, because everybody's like, hey, follow this reporter, they're already there, right? That kind of part of the breaking news was very, very valuable to Twitter. And that's gone now because you don't see the top line, the good stuff now. You see the grifters, you see the conspiracy theorists, you see the big, because the way the algorithms, because this is purposeful, because it's pay to play now. The way Twitter's set up now, it's pretty much worthless for breaking news. Twitter's always been kind of a mess, but it's what you make of it. I keep my Twitter pretty filtered down, so I've always had a really good Twitter experience. Twitter's the first social media I ever had. I was 35, 36 years old. I never had social media in my life. Twitter's the first one I have. I still don't have Facebook, still don't have Instagram, don't plan on ever getting it. But it was because of the information flow. And that's pretty much gone now. A lot of reporters have moved over to Blue Sky, and Blue Sky is never going to replace Twitter. But the one part of Twitter that was really the magic of Twitter, which was it was an integration of reporters and news sites. All those people came together in one place and had all the information in one shot. That's gone now with Twitter. And you got to just sort through it to the point where a lot of that breaking news, I just kind of stepped out of it. I'm like, I'm going to check on this story 2 or 3 times through the day. I know all the initial reports are going to be bad. I'll just check on it as I go and threw up the 24-hour rule. And it's going to be more like that now because trying to follow breaking news just through social media, I'm not going to say it's completely not worth it because we're going to have something big enough we're going to need to do that. But it's a tool out of the tool bag that we that do news and coverage and commentary, we've lost that tool now. And it is a loss. And it's something that's going to hurt trying to cover it if you're people like us who are trying to do it in good faith and do it with good information. Your job just got a whole lot harder. And the people that are doing the bad faith and spreading bad information and clicks and just want the outrage bait, their lives got a lot easier, and it's monetized and to be easier. And that's just the reality of it. And we're going to have to all adjust. So 2025, media-wise, really didn't get off to a good foot, and that's kind of what I was trying to drive at.
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that I think about here is, one, a lot of the journalists and even the news organizations have left Twitter to go to Blue Sky. So you kind of don't have that same legitimacy from those organizations anymore. And then the second thing is that, when you have, I kind of remember kind of after the election, Elon Musk, who owns Twitter, was kind of talking about how everyone is the media now. And
Yeah.
there is some truth to that, but then there's the danger that you just have someone out there who doesn't really care about whether the facts are correct or not, just kind of spewing whatever is out there, and whatever information is there, and you may not have all the facts or all of that. So it just kind of degrades the experience, and it makes it less trustworthy. But I also wonder if it also makes it more dangerous that, rumors could be spread that could either hinder an investigation or cause other things.
Yeah, and this is not a new problem. This is a human problem. The joke from, the yellow newspaper days is, the lie gets around the world before the truth gets its pants on. That's still true,
Yep.
but it's even faster now because of social media. I'm a big fan of citizen journalism. I actually do some work in supporting and mentoring people that want to get into that. I got a buddy of mine named Justice that covers Wheeling, West Virginia, and he's now got a Substack. Now got a couple people working with him. You know, Citizen journalist just doing it, has a day job, but he goes to the city council meetings and he covers stuff. And he's covered really important stuff. Like, there's been a big fight in that city over, the homeless problem and camping bans and that sort of stuff and things like that. Does really good work because he works at it and he means it and he's trying to do it to help his community. So I'm a big fan of citizen journalism. Social media and just covering stuff, though, I know journalism is a bad word to a lot of people, but journalism is really important. I take it seriously enough that I would never call myself a journalist because I'm not. I do some journalist adjacent stuff. I work with journalists. I try to promote them. I do some, I've done some pieces where, you do journalism to do the piece because you got to investigate and you got to research it. But, I would never call myself a journalist because I respect it. I think we need to be careful and put a little bit more emphasis on that terminology. And it's not a degree and it's not the internships and it's not where you work that makes you a journalist. It's the work you do. Are you trying to get good information out to people? That makes you a good journalist. And the thing with you're asking about if it's dangerous. Well, gossip's always been dangerous. Word of mouth is a telephone game of anything is always dangerous. And you saw it on New Year's Day. Just talking, I was completely unplugged, but I was at a family function. So just between the, 10 people or whatever that was in the house I was at somebody else's house, just various talking back and forth. Okay, well, the game's canceled. The game's not canceled. This guy was a veteran. This guy wasn't a veteran. And that was just from people in different rooms on their phones. And because there was one TV on because we were watching football, so it was breaking in every so often on that. And then the people in the kitchen with the cooking, there's another TV on, and then people on their phones. Just in that micro ecosystem of a house with people that are all related and family and friends, all kinds of gossip back and forth just because of the nature of the beast, because everybody's on their phone getting their own stuff, right? Now, multiply that by a couple million people and you see the problem. So it really is the old telephone game, but when it's breaking news, when it's a terrorist attack, when it's political, when it's something from overseas, when it's life and death type stuff, tornado coming. We saw this during the hurricane coverage. They're having trouble with hurricane coverages now, natural disasters when you got to get good information out. It can be very dangerous. And the onus, though, is not going to be on the companies because Twitter doesn't care. And the legacy news networks have to integrate with social media more and more to be viable. So it's really on the onus of the consumer, us, the normal people, the account holders, to make sure we have good, clean accounts and good, clean timelines. And you got to do that before the crisis. Because once the crisis comes, it's too late to figure out who's doing the right thing because it's just an avalanche of information. You got to get those good people in your timeline ahead of time so that you're prepared for the crisis just like anything else.
Speaking of what, we talk about social media, but how did the media itself handle this event? This was a major event happening in a major city, on a major day. So
yeah,
how did they handle this?
They handled it as best they could. I'm going to defend the media here a little bit because the communication out of New Orleans, stop me if you've heard this one before from the Katrina days. The information, that press conference was absolutely embarrassing. You had Senator John Kennedy attacking the media at the press conference. You had the field agent for the FBI countermanding the mayor for calling it a terrorist attack. The mayor's trying to do the best she can. The police chief has done some media hits that have been absolutely embarrassing, including getting into a fight with a Sky News person where she's like, well, if you understood terrorism, you wouldn't ask this question. I'm paraphrasing, but it was very snotty and high-handed, like, lady, he's not the one with the body count in the city. You need to answer these questions. There's information that didn't get out immediately that was really pertinent to this situation. The physical barriers, the bollards and the other systems for Bourbon Street were under construction because the Super Bowl's coming in February to New Orleans. So the fact that they were under construction left this thing vulnerable. So little pieces of the story like that city officials needed to get and the media needed to report. When you start out with a press conference where everybody's just antagonistic against the media, and the media is not getting the story, you miss the little details like that are really, really important. So while social media is focusing on, did he have a flag? Is it a flag? What does the flag mean? And all that stuff, you miss something really important like, hey, the chief of police says we had a plan and it failed, and part of the plan was they're doing all this stuff for the Super Bowl, and you have this New Year's Eve, which is one of the biggest days in New Orleans, because it's a traditional place in the winter for people in the South to go. You didn't think that would be, maybe that should have been done in September, November, October before, so it was ready for New Year's. Those are the kind of questions you need a media for, a good journalist. And it's not quarterbacking after the fact. That's the stuff that you press a agent of the government and public officials and elected officials on. Okay, why were we doing construction during New Year's Eve? Why wasn't it done before now? And I'm not picking on them. It's just an example. That's where you need good journalism and good media. And the media needs to be able to ask those questions. And we saw from the press conference on, and I think it comes from the social media stuff we're talking about, we've just banged on the media, and I've tried to quit saying the media. I try to say news media, social media, because it's all separate stuff, right? We've just banged on the media so much that now the first thing a public official does when they get to a microphone is start fighting with the media, because they know that will take the onus off whatever screw-ups they have. We saw it in so many presidential debates. It's now gotten down to the local level. So the first thing everybody does at a press conference is, if they don't like a question, they start attacking the media because they know that part will go viral. And then the issue at hand, or did they screw up? Did they not screw up? Was there a lapse? Was there not a lapse? That goes by the wayside because now we've just fed the social media machine. So it all goes together now, and it's all a big mess. And the news media hasn't learned how to adjust to that yet. They don't know how to respond to that yet. They're going to have to learn. But it's also something that people that are elected officials and content creators are taking advantage of that doesn't help anybody. And I don't know what the answer to it is, but that's what you see at these press conferences now is it's not them using the media to get their message out. It's them versus the media, and the media versus them, because the media feels attacked and has to fight back. And meanwhile, we've got bodies laying in the streets with no answers because they can't get along, and them not getting along is actually helping both of their stated purposes for attention. That's a bad situation that we've gotten ourselves in this country with media.
Yeah, I do think back to the days of Katrina, and the press conferences then were pretty hectic.
Yeah.
Back then too. There's a part of it, and I say this because I have relatives, and my dad's half of the family is from central Louisiana, that I think that's a Louisiana thing.
Partially, yeah. And
in some cases,
those folks, there's a cultural divide down there because it is a tourist town.
Mm-hmm.
So the locals do have a little bit of okay, y'all visiting, this is our town. There's a little bit of that going on. And then when a major news event breaks, that pops up. And I understand, I come from a small town that's a tourist town, so I get it. Like, not to that level, obviously. But I get that of, like, they just come to see the poor hillbillies. I've been there and done that, okay? So it's like, hey, we're just here to see the Cajuns and get drunk and party and leave. And they're sensitive to that. I get that. You are absolutely correct. That comes out down there. But the thing about it is, too, though, is you just have to be media savvy now because everything's political and everything's media. So if you have an event like this, I understand the defensivism, but understand that, yeah, it's not fair that this is the only time anybody's paying attention to your town, but it is what it is, and you got to get in front of the microphone and the camera, and you got to perform. And if you can't do that, then you probably don't need to be in public office, and you probably don't need to be a reporter, and you probably don't need to be a content creator or whatever your situation is. Because that's the new world we live in. Everybody's got a camera, and the news legacy media, they all have the same cameras we do basically now because they're running the video from the handheld cell phones, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can't be media savvy and understand, like, I have to put aside all my feelings about why I don't like this and just give them that 30-second soundbite because everything about my town is going to be judged on this 30-second soundbite, it's not fair. It's not good. It's reality. And that's where we're at in life. And you see those gaps open up, their cultural gaps, class gaps, racial gaps, demographic gaps, whatever you want to call it. You see them open up in crisis, and the cameras and the lights and the sound and the viral video is amplifying them. So I think you make a great point there.
Yeah. One of the other questions that I think I have, and I don't know if this is as a major problem with New Orleans as it is with other cities in the United States, is the weakening of local media. We don't
Absolutely.
have a lot of in towns across the country strong media organizations like we used to. Um, I remember my hometown newspaper back in Michigan. It was a pretty strong daily. Now I think it's a few days a week, and mostly online. I think they still try to do good news, but there are some problems, especially in parts of the country where the media is not as strong. Again, I don't know if that's the issue with New Orleans. I think just because they're a larger city and because of the type of city they are, they're going to have a stronger media presence. But that is an issue.
Yeah, what's happened is, and I've covered this a lot in writing and podcasts, and I've talked to you about it before.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is when you don't have local media, the national media takes over the landscape. So you have, you were talking about the weekly, the newspapers and the small newspapers I work with, they're all 1 day a week now. You go back home. There is no local news for all practical purposes other than, because internet gossip has replaced it. So you see that happen, but what's happened is as the local news has fell off, everything goes to syndication and the national news takes over because there's an information vacuum. So now national news is more important. So everybody's watching Fox News instead of their local Fox affiliate, for example. Pick some. I did good example. I did Fox 5 DC a couple days ago, and I'm on there pretty regularly. And that's a unique station because, DC is technically a local station, but it's really a regional station, but it's DC, so they cover international and national news a lot. And that's something I'm cognitive of, you don't have stations like that except in certain cities anymore. DC has it. Atlanta has a really vibrant, New York's always had strong local media. But then you think about cities that are, up your way. Detroit's had a real problem with, as the city drew down, their media suffered for it. Let's use a good example in your backyard, Minneapolis, St. Paul. When all the mess happened with the riots and all that, one of the things that came out of that was, the Star Tribune. That was at the same time the Star Tribune pretty much got rid of most of their local cover stuff. It was the same kind of time frame within a year or two. So the traditional media, I'm just using them as examples. There's other, but they're kind of the big dog up there, right? So they, right when you needed them most, they weren't there. They didn't have those 2 or 3 beat reporters to go down there anymore. Not that the folks there didn't do good work. It was all the national people coming in. Everybody's going national. Whereas, traditionally you would have the local people and everybody would just come in and see what they have to say about it. That's the change. And it's not a healthy change, but there's no way to really go back and fix it. What I think is going to start happening is I think you are starting to see a little bit of a backlash with national news coverage because the ratings are showing that. People have a hunger for it. Even Fox's ratings, they're dominating everybody else. But if you look at top lines, they're down overall because, they've got their audience and they're not growing. I think you're going to see a change back, but this goes back to the social media thing. News networks, radio stations, the traditional local news ecosystem. The ones that go online are going to survive, and the ones that don't. It's that simple. I've been preaching this because I do it. Like talk radio, news radio, and podcasting is all the same thing now. And if you don't understand that, you're going to go out of business really fast. If you don't have a podcast for your radio show, you're done. You're toast. Stuff like that. But those are the local news things that really fed the local news ecosystem was local radio, local papers, local this, local that. If you lose that, internet gossip can't fix that. It can't fill the gap. But that's what's filling the gap now. So I think you're going to see a lot of local radio, local newspapers. They're going to start trying to reclaim those afternoon national syndication stuff. I think you'll see that stuff start coming back. I think that's the change you'll start seeing. They're going to start clawing it back because business-wise they've got to, and I think it'll be a healthy transition back. The pendulum swings back, right? And that'll be the way it goes.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And it'll be interesting to see in the coming years, especially now, as we move into this, with the second Trump administration, how media will handle all of this. Media, especially with Trump, is always interesting because it kind of, I don't know, the media kind of went a bit crazy, and Trump, they both feed off of each other. So that will be interesting to see how that shakes out in the coming years.
Well, because it's been all Trump all the time for 9 years,
Mm-hmm.
for and against. If you're for him or against him, you're making money. And Trump's the only thing that really moves the ratings outside of breaking news, natural disasters, and sports. Like they've proven it. Like the only thing keeping cable TV afloat is live events, sports, and news. That's it. Everything else is, you can stream it. So Trump is the biggest game in town. But the problem now is, as a lame duck, that gravy train's getting ready to end. There's no personality like Trump that was already a megastar before he got into politics that can replace him. And they're going to try to replace him with various people, and it ain't going to work. So if your business model for the last 8-9 years has been all Trump all the time, I've got friends on both sides of that. I've got friends at outlets where I'm like, all you do is bash Trump. That you're making money, but it gets boring. I've got people that all they do is support Trump. I was like, well, you're making money, but what are you going to do next? Because that's your reputation now. So, this is going to be a big side, and it's going to come faster than people think, because these lame duck presidencies, you're already seeing it a little bit today as we're talking. They're going to vote on the Mike Johnson speakership, so we don't know how that's going to break out during this recording. But just the way it is, just the mess of it, they're not going to have a successful legislative agenda because it's too much of a mess. They don't know how to do it. They're incompetent.
Yep.
So this lame duck thing is going to become a thing way faster than people think. I'm talking summer this year. You're gonna start feeling the effects of lame duckism, because the JD Vances of the world, the other people in the GOP that are going to want the next bite of the pie, they're not going to wait. They're going to have no problem pushing forward. They're going to have to handle the Trump thing really gingerly because they can't tick off the diehard people. They can't wait till next year because those midterms are coming and they're probably not going to go well. So there's a lot of moving parts to this thing. And Trump being at the end, both with his age, being term limited, he'll still be a player afterwards, but the likelihood that this Trump thing ends ugly is really, really high, and I don't think people really understand that. And it's nothing to do with, well, Trump won a mandate. Well, yeah, he did, because Joe Biden went the opposite of conjunction junction on national TV and forgot and couldn't function. Careful with those mandates. And an electoral mandate is not a governing mandate. Those are two different things. And Trump, from his first term, showed he didn't know how to have a governing, coalition. So I think this thing is going to end not well, and it's going to end really quickly. But it's not because of the left or the right or people not liking Trump or whatever. It's just inertia.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, the inertia gets you.
Yep. Well, speaking of presidents, the thing I kind of also wanted to chat with you about the passing of Jimmy Carter, who passed on Sunday, December 29th, at the age of 100. And he was a fascinating figure. He was kind of really, for me, the first president that I really got to know. And he's interesting in that his governing time was not great. His post-presidency had a lot of positives, but also there were some rough spots there too. But, his faith was also something that was upfront and in a way that I don't think we've seen before or after with a president. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts about Carter and what his impact was on the American public and what that kind of means for the future.
Let's start with the faith part, because now we have some hindsight, something I've been thinking about. The Carter way he had his faith, and I understand he was a Southern Baptist, but theologically he was liberal. And I don't, again, if you're not steeped in Christian culture and terminology, I'm not talking about politically liberal. I'm talking about theologically liberal. That's not a slam. That's just an identifying marker. Mm-hmm. He was very theologically liberal in his views. He kind of, if you go back and think about it, the way Carter was treated for his faith and the way his faith was treated was really a forerunner for where we're at on a lot of this stuff now. because he came from the traditional Southern Baptist church and was a Southern Baptist till the day he died, still taught Sunday school as long as he was able. This amazing piece of Americana that up to about 10 years ago, you could go down to Georgia and sit in a former president's Sunday school class on Sunday for pretty much just walk in and sit down. Like, that's pretty remarkable if you think about it. But he had that, the more liberal mindset, which is really glaring with where evangelical Christianity, especially his brethren in the Southern Baptist Convention, because remember, the Southern Baptist conservative resurgence and the political movements of the moral majority and things like that, a lot of that was a reaction to the Carter years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was, because they were buoyed by the success of Reagan. But the Carter years, it's really funny because on paper, if you didn't know anything about Christianity, Jimmy Carter should have been the poster child for all the stuff that evangelicals wanted, but he was outcast from the people that did that. And you can draw a line from that stuff in the late 70s, early 80s, when the Christian conservative evangelicalism got political. And that was the split, was the Jimmy Carters of the world are not welcome in that movement. So whichever way you fall on, theology, that was a very noticeable split. And purposeful on his part, he's talked openly about it. So the faith part's really interesting because he was ahead of where we are now with where politicized Christianity has gone and the divide in it, where you have, very liberal Christianity, which is very accepting to a lot of different things, and we can hash that all out some other time. And then the conservative Christianity, evangelicalism, and again, I hate that term, but we'll hash that out on a nice long podcast some other time, even though technically I is one. The conservative Christianity that became a cultural conservative movement. You can draw a line to Carter, and it's like, okay, that's where those two things split off, and we're rent into and never will pass again, right? That's that time frame. That's the faith part. The political part's really fascinating because not all of there was the domestic and the overseas stuff. We'll talk foreign policy, so let's start domestic. The economic stuff is a little more complicated than people want to talk about. Nixon put in price controls, which tanked the economy, but it took a couple years for it to happen. Ford didn't have any power to do anything because he was, a placeholder, and then he fell on his sword and pardoned Nixon and all that. But he had come from Congress, so the Congress didn't really want to help him out. And there was a lot of politics that nobody cares about anymore. So he got handed a mess. Now, when he took over the mess, he didn't handle the mess well. I think that's the fair way to look at it. He did do some stuff that benefited Reagan and the economic resurgence of the 80s. The deregulation stuff primed the pump for the stuff Reagan wanted to do. And he brought on Paul Volcker. Y'all can look that one up on your old time. So Volcker's always twit with Reagan, but Carter appointed him. So some of the stuff Reagan gets credit for, Carter kind of set him up for success on. So it's always more complicated than that. But yeah, he inherited a mess and he didn't handle the mess well. There's this hagiography now of like, well, he told the American people what they didn't want to hear. That's partially fair, but that's also oversimplification. You as a leader, part of your leadership is you can tell your people hard truths, but you have to do it in a way that they accept it. And Jimmy didn't know how to do that. He tried. He tried it by just being Jimmy Carter. The St. Jimmy thing is also a little overblown. If you go back and look at his first run for governor, there's you would be shocked at some of the stuff Jimmy Carter said and did and his campaign did. Like, it really ugly stuff. But he pivoted.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt,
go ahead.
But I'm guessing that a lot of that had to deal with civil rights and...
Let's call it what it is. It was a lot of race baiting.
Well, and I'm not surprised by that. That was the climate in the 1960s, and that would be, he was a Democrat in Georgia. Yeah. So,
but he pivoted. I come from the state of Robert C. Byrd. This gets controversial, and yeah, maybe he got away with it because he was a Democrat and a Republican wouldn't have got away with it. But I think it's a good thing Obama was at his funeral. And yeah, he was in the Ku Klux Klan. Like, there's no. But he pivoted off it, and he admitted he was wrong about it, and he moved on from it. And I think it's a really good thing that our first black president was at Robert C. Byrd, who started his career as a Klansman's funeral, and could say nice things about him. I think that's a good thing for the country. And if you get mad about that, then send me a tweet. Carter pivoted. He was a Southern governor who got on the right side of civil rights when it wasn't an easy thing to do, and he should get credit for that. And as governor, he did some stuff in that regard, so he gets credit for that kind of stuff. The foreign policy stuff is ugly. Iran is in our head. All the Iran stuff goes straight to Jimmy Carter. Now you can go back to the Shaw and before that, and some of the stuff Nixon did. Like I get all that, but it got bad under Carter. Carter's policy towards Iran was bad. He had very poor discernment on lending his credibility to dictators around the world. I don't know why he did that. I'm not going to post-judge the man's heart. There is this strand in, and again, these are terminologies that's going to trip people up. Just understand this is in the context. There is this fair criticism of when you go to a very liberal theology that gets very, very open. You get it too open, and then you get susceptible to things like, doing photo ops and putting leniency to dictatorship. He had very controversial things to say about Palestine and Israel, which again, Southern Baptist Christian, very much against the grain of what we think of his people now. So there's a split there. Those are all fair criticisms. I contend with Jimmy Carter. I did this for the Canadians when I did a news hit for them, and I said this on Fox 5 the other night. The thing about Jimmy Carter is his life was so long. I think the presidency really is like the fourth or fifth thing on the obituary list. You list everything they did on the obituary. I don't think it's the top line item. I really don't. I think it's about fourth or fifth down the list. He had such a long career. I did Habitat for Humanity things where we went out and did, that. Go listen to the interview of the founder of them. He's like, yeah, nobody knew who we were before the Carters. Now it's a nationwide thing. Good stuff. He was married to Rosalind for 77 years. I always bring that up, and people are like, why do you bring that up? I'm like, because that's unusual, man. That's not normal. That's something you should praise. And think about this. His cultural impact went from Babe Ruth to Taylor Swift. Like, that was his lifetime. He went from the Great Depression to COVID. That's a lot of history. That's a lot of stuff. And, he lived in the same house in Plains, Georgia. There was the funny thing about, having to sell the peanut farm, and a lot of that's apocryphal now, but it is, that kind of stuff built into the lore of it. Are we going to see a guy who was okay living a relatively simple life with impact as a president, again, whether you agreed with him or not, for all his flaws and failures? I don't think we see a president like that again anytime soon. He wasn't Cincinnatus at the plow like people are trying to make him out to be with all the funeral dirges. He wasn't quite that. But as far as an everyman being president, that's probably as close in our lifetimes as we're going to see. I think that's a fair way to put it. Look, my dad was a history teacher. In history, I don't subscribe to great man theory. I think whoever that person is, man, woman, whatever, that is a historical figure, I think the flaws are the light you need to really expose the greatness. And Carter's one of those people where I don't think people are going to call him great, but he saw some really great things and he did some great things. And the flaws of the man bring those into focus. And I think you do the totality of the person. And I think that's the way I like to look at the Jimmy Carter situation now that he's passed on at 100 years old, and God bless him.
Yeah, it's fascinating reading some of the things about Carter that are either A, he was just this wonderful person and, as you said, kind of a hagiography, or B, he was terrible and treasonous and all of this stuff. And I think that I don't think you can ignore some of the downsides of Carter, especially that he did lend a lot of support to some unsavory characters.
Yes.
There was actually one picture of him meeting with, I think it was Sinwar of Hamas, because he did meet with some people from Hamas.
Yeah,
and
he did.
I don't know. I do agree with you, being that I tend to be a more liberal Christian, that there is this thing where sometimes, maybe to say uncharitably, your brain kind of falls out. in judging people. And sometimes, and I don't think we should ignore those things, but I don't think that is the substance of who he was either.
No.
That's a part of it, but it's not all of it. And I think the fact that he took his faith seriously in a way that I don't think I have ever seen any politician before or after him, do that is something that's important. I think, again, that he did live rather simply throughout his life. The fact that he was married to one person for that long, over 75 years,
What a concept.
that doesn't happen. I mean, there's just, those things can't be ignored either. And I think we either want our leaders to either be saints or demons. And I think that at the end of the day, they're human. And that's who they are. And I think Carter, of all of them, was probably the most human.
Yeah, again, this is a theological term, not a political one, so understand how I'm using liberal here. I mean, like from the German school, not, go down that line. There's a thing with liberal Christianity where you get so far into saving the earth as it exists that you forget that there's evil.
Yep.
I think that's the fair way to put it, and I think it's a fair criticism. Now, conservative theology has the other problem where they get so into authoritarianism that they forget that authoritarianism in and of itself becomes evil. So it's, that spectrum works both ways. But I think you get into that mindset of trying to save the world and you forget that there's really evil monsters that you can't fix with love. You can't, and it's not your job to. You can present love to them, but you can't fix their soul. And I think that's kind of the road some of that goes down. And I'm trying to be a little charitable. I think some of it, probably was there personal prejudices and stuff involved? Probably, but I can't see the man's heart, so I'm not going to delve into that. I think that's where some of that goes. And I think when you talk about being human, this is one of the things I try to do when I'm doing analysis or, trying to cover something in real time. When you're covering something like Trump, who's just an amoral person by his own words, deeds, and actions and makes no bones about it. He does what he wants whenever he wants and doesn't need forgiveness for anything. When you're covering somebody like that, it's so easy to make him a caricature and to just make him all evil and all bad. And Trump's really hard because he tries to make you do that because both of those benefit him. He wants that dichotomy. And it's really important for us to remember that Trump's a human being. And even the unsavory characters in his circle are a human being. And when we're dealing with a terrible dictator, pick whichever one's in the world, pick Vladimir Putin. That's a human being somewhere in there, under the layers of nonsense and murderous thugism. You have to remember these are humans we're dealing with, not characters in the fairy tales where it's good people versus bad people. But that's how we cover them. And somebody like Carter, it's really easy because he did some good stuff. And it's really easy because he had some really terrible, very public, the most public failures. People still make fun of the cardigan speech. Like that will be a thing that's taught forever. Like, don't do this. In political science, and anytime somebody goes on campaign, they will show that clip and go, whatever you do in this campaign, do not do this, right? He had some very public failings. So those public failings and the personality and the character make it easy to do the dichotomy. It's really important for us, and this goes back to the first thing we talked to the social media. Social media wants the dichotomy.
Yep, they do.
And the hard thing is for us to go, okay, if we're doing the dichotomy, we've already lost. We're already behind, and we've already given into bad information because there's no such thing as dichotomies with people. They're somewhere in the middle most of the time on most things, and then one or two parts of them will be on the extremes. Carter hanging out with terrorists and dictators was a very bad thing all the way on the end of that scale. Him doing Habitat for Humanity for, I'm guessing, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, really far on the other scale. Most of Jimmy Carter is not either one of those things. It's in the middle. And that's true for absolutely everybody. You, me, Trump, and whoever replaces Trump. That's always going to be the way. So I think it's a healthy thing theologically and politically to understand that you're dealing with humans on a range of humanism and dealing with them in that way and not just giving into the easy caricatures and the dichotomies and the social media posts and evil, good, treason, patriot. That stuff's easy, but if it's easy, it's probably a lie.
One of the things I wanted to also kind of bring up is where do you think, or what do you think Carter's passing says about American evangelicalism? Having that you, as you say, are still part of it. I grew up in it. Um, you know, there seems to have been a lot of shifting and changes over the last, arguably nearly 50 years since he became president. What does his passing have to say about all of that?
So I'm going to pick on the Southern Baptists, but that's just because they're the biggest dog on the block in this regard for evangelicalism. They're next to the Catholic Church, they're the biggest. Carter was a Southern Baptist all his life, although he publicly broke with them a few years back, very publicly, but, to his core, he still thought it was, no, it's not me, it's you kind of a thing, right? In fact, if you read the letter he put out about that, that's pretty much what he said. He's like, this is your fault, not mine. I don't want to leave. You forced me out. Carter's been an outcast to, and again, this is a spectrum thing. When I say evangelical Christianity, for the terms of this, I mean what you think of now today. Carter's been an outcast pretty much my entire adult life to what we consider conservative Christian evangelicalism, to the point that he is a villain. He is considered a very bad person, a bad president. They think he's a heretic in a lot of ways, especially on the Israel stuff, because conservative evangelicalism and Israel is so interlinked now that there's just no way to even have a conversation about it anymore, good, bad, or indifferent. By the way, even though I agree with supporting Israel, I think that's very unhealthy. There's still a country that deserves criticism for a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that anymore in conservative evangelicalism. Some of that's eschatology, some of it's ignorance. A lot of it's just politics. But we'll hash that out somewhere else. But Carter was villainized by it. Now, theologically, I disagree with Jimmy Carter on all sorts of stuff. But we've lost the ability, and this is a good example of it. One of the problems with this is a series of podcasts. You could spend 20 years on it. One of the issues with conservative evangelicalism is it's really been self-purifying over the last generation. There's just no room for dissent whatsoever. Like, they are really refining. You talk the initial conservative resurgence in the Southern Baptist Convention, which is a very important political event in America, not just a Christian event. That looks like a Tea Party compared to what they're doing right now. Mm. It's all politics. If you don't vote the right way, we don't want you in our church. I could not have told you growing up in the church I grew up in, a lot of blue dog Democrats mostly, probably everybody in there. I'd have no idea how any of them people voted because they never talked about it, very rarely. Especially not at church. You didn't talk politics at church. That was, not forbidden, but it was just considered bad manners. You just didn't talk. Now, when we left the sanctuary and you go eat over the food, it was all politics all the time, but you didn't talk about it in church and Sunday school. You have Sunday school classes about Trump now and politics. You have curriculum that has politics written into it purposefully so. That's a huge shift. And the problem, there's a twofold problem with that is, one is it becomes very tunnel visioned in because you don't have anywhere to go. And two is you lose people. And there's no argument that evangelicalism is losing people. Church attendance is down. Every metric that matters is down. Southern Baptists will point to an internal number about baptisms being up. But if you're losing people to the church overall, that's not really helping you any. It's turning people off, not because they disagree. Even people that agree with you politically, they just don't want that in their church all the time. They don't want their church about that. And then you have the Carter thing where he almost went the other way. And I'm assuming here, but I think he was pretty bitter about it. If you read his language, he was bitter about it, where he kind of almost went the other way and became bitter. And it's like, well, my Christianity is pure because I didn't treat me like they treated me. Mm-hmm. That's not healthy either. But that same thing, we're using Carter as the example, that's been playing out in families, in churches. We've seen church splits. We've seen all sorts of stuff in the evangelical community of like, the whole movement of evangelicalism is going one way, and it's a political, cultural conservatism direction. And if you're not down with it, they're just going to leave you behind and they don't want nothing to do with you and you get cast aside. And the Carter thing kind of, again, that was kind of a forerunner of it. We didn't realize it. In hindsight, it's easy to see now, like, okay, they couldn't get along and this was going to happen. But look where we're at now. And traditionally, you could have a Jimmy Carter or two in your church, excuse me, who had a dissenting opinion. Not very many churches have dissenting opinions anymore. And that's not healthy. It's not healthy at all.
No, and it to me makes churches and well, in other organizations, just rather boring if everyone just agrees, but that's kind of where we're at.
Boring and stale is the word I would use. You don't have any dynamicism. That's not a word. Dynamicism, dynamic, whatever. Dynamicism should be a word if it's not. You don't have any dynamicism in your church if everybody just agrees all the time doing the same thing and you all agree. And then, like, no, that's aerobics. You're just, doing the routine every day at 8 o'clock, right? You need to have some dynamic interaction in your church. And some of that is healthy conflict. I said healthy. I'm not talking about arguing over blue versus red carpet, which has split more churches than almost anything. That's a whole other subject, but we really ought to do a podcast on that. It's fascinating. There's people who will tell you you're going to hell if you put blue carpet in your church instead of red carpet. It's amazing. But there's this whole thing where can you control yourself to have a healthy conflict with another human being? That iron sharpens iron verse.
Mm-hmm.
That's force and friction, man. That ain't a love tap. Iron does not move being gentled with. If you've never filed down a knife or used a whetstone, like you're digging into it, right? There's abrasion, there's conflict, there's fight, there's violence. Like that iron sharpening iron thing is not love taps and everybody agreeing. You got to have a little bit of conflict to have dynamicism. And your church, if everybody's just agreeing all the time, it's going to be stale. And there's not going to be any outside thought. And if you don't have any kind of outside, basic laws of thermodynamics, if you don't have any outside movement, you're not going to have any change in speed. You're not going to have any reaction to anything. Human beings are made a certain way. And just because you put them in a church doesn't change how they are. And I've never seen somebody so sanctified that they quit being a human being yet. So, that's the goal, but none of us got there and we're all going to die falling short. So you need to just put in like, okay, we're still all human beings. We should have a little bit of push and pull and give and take. And some of that in our churches. And if your church doesn't have room for a lot of that, you've probably missed the point on a lot of Christian teachings on loving, understanding, working out your salvation, not lounging through comfortably your salvation, working out your salvation. It's not supposed to be easy. It's called faith, not easy. But we want easy. We want performance. We want to just sit down and be told what we want to do and hear some funny jokes and go out and do whatever we want to do. We have a very observational Christianity and conservative evangelicalism right now where you show up, do your routine, and go on. And people will get offended at that, but that's the design. That's what it's designed to be. It's designed to be a lifestyle system. And the more you do that, the more I think, my argument, you get away from what Christianity is actually supposed to be, which is service before self. Because those two things are not compatible. End of rant. I could go like, I went to Liberty Online. I've talked to these people. I've fought them in the discussion boards. It's like there's just a certain strand of folks that are like, they're just incapable of having a faith that isn't happy all the time. And I'm not talking about joy. That's different. I'm sorry, people are going to get mad. I'm going to listen to K-Love all day, and I'm going to have my perfect children, and the K-Love stuff, the positive, everything positive, like, maybe I'm just cynical and hard-boiled, and I'm a horrible D- Christian. I get all that. Like, I don't think that's healthy.
No, it's not.
I get wanting to be uplifting, but I think we've oversold this happy, performative, you can fix everything if your lifestyle lines up just perfectly kind of thing. And I'm like, man, the people I knew had the most faith were dirt floor poor and and had struggles that we can't say on this podcast because we'll get censored on them. Like ugly, like, and those people had faith, man. I I think the church just needs to trim back down to fighting weight, and it's not going to happen probably in our lifetimes. But people are secure and they're privileged and they're happy and they're satisfied.
Well, I mean, and this is
Sorry.
where I could get into another podcast,
I mean,
but
you're the pastor. You tell me.
yeah,
I'll stay on shut up.
no, I was thinking about the music, and I was actually big into listening to contemporary Christian music in the 80s and 90s, and that music seemed a little bit more real because it was actually writing about people faith in real life. Whereas I think today it was funny. I stopped at a Culver's for lunch with my husband, and I realized this music, and then they were playing religious music. And it's like, this is really just in the background now. It doesn't have any meaning to it. It doesn't have any, it's just
A lot of
performative,
sameness.
happy, and it's sameness, and it's just flat. And so, and I think that says a lot about some of the faith today too. It's that it's sameness and flat. It doesn't have any character to it.
I have a working theory that the churches that have gotten really political in the Trump era, and again, I'm not picking on people that want to vote for Trump. I'm just, it is what it is for the last 9 years, and I've seen it in churches personally. I had to sit down with the pastor of a church I was in. I'm like, look, I don't want to talk about politics in Sunday school every Sunday. I'm just not going to do it. I didn't make a fuss. I didn't, I privately talked to the pastor. I'm like, I'm not going to this thing anymore, and here's why. And I'm going to tell you privately because I'm not making a stink of it, right? And I just had to, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I have this working theory that we've made churches exactly what you said. Too many churches need the politics to get the juice in it.
Mm-hmm.
And too many pastors have figured out they can drop a political line or two in their sermon and get a big reaction.
Mm-hmm.
They can get that amen line, right? They can get, I'm from the old tradition. There's a lot of shouting back at the preacher,
Mm-hmm.
like, they're playing to the crowd to get it. The other
Good
guy
call
says the
response.
amen corner. Those old Methodist churches in the mountains, man, it's literally a box of about 8-9 chairs in the corner. It's a literal amen corner. It's not metaphorical. It's, the men of the church that were the leaders sat there and gave the preacher instant feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. Like that people forget these sayings actually had some meat to them. Like, no, you can go to Gilgal Church and that box is still there. I think a lot of people in the church and a lot of conservative, again, culturally conservative evangelicals have figured out that putting politics in their church is a real easy way to get excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good way to get engagement, and it gives you a lot of juice without having to put in the really messy stuff of derivative theology or having to attack a cultural issue or whatever. It's a lot of they, them, and those kind of stuff that you can just rail about. My dad always told me, he said one of the things he's like, beware of the preacher at a church who does a lot of preaching about another church.
Hmm.
He's like, that's a big red flag. Like, why is he constantly preaching about that church over there? What's that got to do with it? Preach to your church. What are you doing? Well, if you're just preaching against stuff all the time, because it's easier.
Yep.
It's easier to preach about why John MacArthur, I understand he's in the hospital, not doing well now. I don't want to besmirch him, but just because he's a big known name that's controversial, it's easier to just rail against those guys. It's easy to go after Beth Moore, pick whoever. That's easier. And I can throw in a line about, how, the devil is destroying our country if we don't support this candidate and that candidate and whatever. And I can throw in a Trump line or whatever, and they just get instant juice because putting a sermon together 3 times a week is hard work. I watched my dad do it as a bivocational pastor. I just knew Saturday night he's going to be up till about 2 in the morning. That's how you like to do it. Politics is replacing the excitement because a lot of the worship style has gotten very mundane, in my opinion. I think that's a real thing, and people are going to deny it, but I'm seeing too much of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame. It's man, so much of what's happening with cultural Christianity is backwards. It's just dead set backwards, man. Like your political, this is where the moral majority thing failed so badly from what Jerry Falwell said he wanted it to be. You've just become a voting bloc like everybody else. You're not affecting anything. You're the affected. You know, politics beats out the faith every time, unfortunately. And I don't understand people who think because of your faith you have to give up all your agency on your vote. That's just mind-boggling to me. And yeah, I've had people that I had a lot of respect for tell me that. Openly tell me that, well, if you don't vote for Trump, you're not a real Christian. Go ahead and get mad, folks. I'm sorry. We're just doing truth today. If you don't vote for Trump, you're not a real Christian. I see and hear that stuff all the time. I've heard it from family members. I'm like, are you listening to yourself? Like, well, God has raised up Trump. Okay. Did God raise up Putin for the Russians? Did, people are like, well, Trump's David. I'm like, no, I think Trump's Saul, and y'all missed the people wanted him and God gave him, but there was repercussions to that. I didn't mean Saul won a lot of battles. He built a great kingdom. Like, it wasn't all bad. He got some stuff done. But the repercussions, because they got their way instead of what they were supposed to be doing. That might preach. You might want to write that one down somewhere. That was free. I won't even charge you for that one.
Thank you. I will keep that down for a future sermon. So, if people wanted to hear more about you, where should they go?
Less theology, because I don't do a lot of that publicly. I do. You get me going on stuff.
No, you do more than you want to care to admit.
I've studied it for 20 years, both academically and just because I enjoy it. Like, if I turn my camera here, my corner bookshelf there, that's almost all religious books. Because I keep all my textbooks and stuff, and systematic theologies and stuff, and I've just always. But I will say this, and I mean it. I've learned more about leadership and politics and dealing with people studying religion than I did any leadership class or sociology class or psychology class. If you study religion, you're really studying, Elmer Towns always said this, Dr. Towns, he's a very wise man. He said religion's actually, theology is the study of God, religion is the study of how people react to God.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're really reacting to is themselves. So religion is a study of people and how they act and function. You really get to the core of how people think. So if you want to know how politics works and the world works and how people think and move, study theology and study religions and understand why, a Sikh in India sees the world the way they do, or why a Taoist Buddhism from Japan, they see the world the way they do because of the culture they bring up in. And you get past some of the barriers and you start understanding it. But anyway, yeah, study theology and religion, folks. It'll do you good. It's better than some of the other stuff. But yeah, I usually just do politics and culture, but my friend Dennis gets me going because I love talking to him above just about anybody on earth. Heard Tell Show, heardtell.substack.com. It's free to subscribe. You get one-stop shopping. I edit Ordinary Times, a wonderful website with some really good people that we're really proud of. I am proudly a contributor to State Newsroom. We talked about media a minute ago. State Newsroom is a nonprofit that has put a newsroom in that covers state governments they're in all 50 states now. And the one for West Virginia is called West Virginia Watch. That's the State Newsroom outlet. I write commentary for them very proudly. That was one of my big things this year that I'm really proud of. So West Virginia Watch, I get to do that. Also write for the Faith Tribune, my local paper back home. And Four for the Fire on the Twitter and Four for the Fire on the Blue Sky if you want to follow me on any of that. And I've got the YouTubes and all that. But you, my friend, Dennis Saunders, I need to get you on my program because I just like talking to you. And you get me way far afield and I drop the professional talking about stuff and just start ranting. But I appreciate you greatly, sir. I always appreciate your private counsel, and I enjoy our public conversations very, very much.
Same
I got to
here.
try
And
that Culver's out. They just put one down the street from my house, and I haven't been to it yet. So I got to go check that out.
Culver's is
They're
good.
creeping out this way, my friend.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a Wisconsin thing, and it's kind of starting to go national. So
Yeah.
now we just need to have Waffle House up here in Minnesota. We'll see if that ever happens.
We the more I don't know if there's Waffle Houses in heaven. I know there's barbecue trees, but I don't know if there's Waffle Houses. But I hope to sit at a Waffle House and or a Culver with you very soon, my friend. We need to break some bread.
Definitely, definitely. All right. Well, we'll talk again soon. So take care.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about the incoming Trump administration. Do you think it's going to be different from the first Trump administration back in 2017? What do you think will be? Do you think there will be good things that'll come out of it, or not? Well, what about President Carter? What were some of the achievements that you identify with? But what are some of the things that you think where President Carter fell short? And I'm also curious, what do you think about the state of the media, especially social media, especially these days, Twitter? Drop me a line. You can do that by sending me an email at churchinmaine@substack.com. And again, I'd like to know what you're thinking about of all those topics that were mentioned in this episode. Now, if you want to learn more about the podcast, listen to past episodes, or donate, check us out at churchinmaine.org. You can also visit churchandmaine.substack.com to read related articles. If you're listening to this on something like Apple Podcasts, I hope that you will consider either leaving a rating or a review. That helps others find this podcast. And if you have done that already, thank you very much. That is very helpful. And if you haven't, I hope that you will consider doing that. So that's it for this episode of Church in Maine. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Godspeed. And I will see you very soon.